Hello, this is Zach Sokoloff reporting for the final time on my 8th grade algebra class at Stevenson Middle School. The unit I've selected for my defense is Solving Systems of Linear Equations, which I'm teaching after our previous unit on graphing linear equations. It is important to craft an algebra narrative for my students this year, and I believe the transition from graphing lines to solving systems of equations is quite a natural progression. Further, this unit precedes our introduction to graphing quadratic equations, which extends knowledge of slope and intercepts into the realm of second-degree polynomials. This unit is grounded in evidence-based research that will prepare my students for success on their statewide CST examination, as well as on tests like the SAT or the ACT. My unit on systems covers California 8th grade algebra standards 8.0, 9.0, and 15.0. Since Common Core standards will be introduced to 48 states in a few years' time, I also consulted its pre-release standards, and Systems of Equations falls under Algebra 1 Standard 8.EE.8. For this fourth and last defensive practice, I want to explain my evolution as a math teacher. As I began the year, my teaching was informed by my own experiences as a learner. My middle and high school math classes did not place much emphasis on the associational learning that Reddish deems essential to developing a deep, meaningful understanding of newly absorbed material. We almost exclusively took notes and did practice problems, and the day's objective was reinforced with homework. Grades were of the utmost importance, and as a result, obtaining a high grade took precedent over truly engaging with the content. I did not carry all of these practices into my teaching, but some side effects lingered. I did not include hooks or investigations before explanation into my lessons. There was no priming for mathematics, as Baddeley's research indicates is so important for long-term retention, and the lessons were not very student-focused. My active practice piece was limited to independent work most of the time and did not provide my students ample opportunities to communicate in the learning process. Marzano has found that dialogue between students is paramount to creating a lasting knowledge base for an individual, both in terms of talking through one's thought processes and being forced to explain your work to a peer. Further, because of the need to focus heavily on behavior management, I rarely had time to give formative assessments like exit slips, gathering little by way of data to inform my teaching the following day. However, in late October, I went to go observe two masked teachers. I saw Kathy Clemmer and Kevin Coronet, and this experience was important in catalyzing my growth this semester. I will illustrate the changes in my approach to teaching through a description of my Unit 4 block plan and will intersperse specific examples of my highlighted lesson throughout this explanation. Each lesson begins with a hook and an IBE. The hook often asks my students to answer a personal question, something that reveals an aspect of their personality to incorporate into later lesson, and it connects to the material that we are studying that day. This effectively turns the brain on for math class and associates the topic with something the students already enjoy. Reddish and Baddeley extol the significance of connecting the math students' lives, and hooks are a great way to do that. In my lesson on parallel and perpendicular lines, I asked my students to tell me their favorite type of car. We are looking at intersections of lines, and I thought cars were a good way to place this in a context my students understood. I referenced their answers often throughout the lesson. Next comes the IBE, which bridges the hook at the lesson with a demonstration with a demonstrable connection. This task often forces students to analyze or synthesize or apply material they already know to an unknown problem. I had my students watch a clip of the movie Tron, and they were told to draw the motorcycles they saw and the formations that they saw them. They then engaged in a JTPS, asking whether they thought the bikes would ever collide. Van Huvelen explains how it is important to deliver content in many different modes, written, visual, etc., and Marzano believes deeply in communication during learning. This IBE achieves all of those goals. Next comes our deductive structured notes. This method of writing down the new material is mathematical and easy to use for practice or studying. And as Russell Swenson of the Joint Military Intelligence College explains, students can apply general rules to specific problems. We take notes every day in my class, and I try to include brain bubbles as often as possible. These are little bits of prior knowledge that students insert into their notes, so they develop a metacognitive awareness of the connections and interrelatedness between all the material that we study. Here is a short clip of me delivering deductive structured notes. selective structured notes. I want you guys to have parallel lines at the top, and then I want you guys to write down this definition, just like Dana read to us. Parallel lines are lines with the same slope, but different y-intercepts. And so we're building on the material that we did these last few days. We studied slope, and now we're connecting the slope to different types of lines. So this is why our notes are helpful, because they help us see all the connections between the math that we're doing. After notes, we typically move to whiteboard practice. This is the we do portion of the lesson. Students are asked to do problems on their own, but their work is scaffolded by my guidance. I am trying to gradually release responsibility to my students, and this is an intermediary between I do in notes and you do in active practice. After whiteboard practice, students move into their active practice piece. This unit I started with a stationary practice to minimize the need of behavior management. My students did a crisscross worksheet with their table partners, and they were encouraged to talk with one another to solidify their learning. They were also told to focus on their explanations, because this is indicative of a full understanding of material. This method of learning is supported not only by Marzano, but by Tracy Hall's research as well. Here is a short clip of my students working on their active practice. Finally, my students take an exit slip so they can demonstrate their knowledge, as well as for my own data collecting purposes. Exits come in one of two forms, problem-based or reflective, and both help me understand how well my students followed the day's lesson. This is one component of the assessment for learning structure that I've begun to implement in my class, as promoted by both Carol Dweck's growth mindset research and ETS's belief that students must drive their own learning through data-based decisions. Every day I assess my students, either through an exit slip or intermittent checks for understanding. Throughout Unit 4, we quiz twice. Via exit slips, I have my students reflect on what they need to study prior to quizzes, and then they complete model cards afterward in order to see a completely correct version of the problem. They also goal set after each quiz, so they constantly are improving their study skills. Mind maps are another great study tool, as they emphasize connections between material, but since this was the first lesson in the unit, my students have not started theirs yet. There are two areas of improvement I want to target going forward. The first is my use of learning target logs. I do have my students complete these, but they are not integrated seamlessly enough into my practice. My students have multiple opportunities to reflect and assess their current understanding of the material, but it's not as organized as I'd like. After winter break, I plan on implementing a student-centered personal grade tracker coupled with learning target logs, and I think this will work well. My second area of improvement is my homework protocol. I give my students prompts to do, but since they are not graded, they see little reason to do them. However, my students were reluctant to take notes as first as well, and now that they see the benefit, they do so willingly, so I'm hopeful that this aspect of my teaching will follow a similar path. Thank you for your time.